On Akiva, Kay and Nyx dug into a fruit that, when the chef cuts into it, bursts open with dozens of flies that have been growing inside. What's unnerving to me happens to be a delicacy for Star Wars, as Kay lets Nyx happily lap up the fluttering bugs while she leans in to begin nibbling the fruit. It's a very different scene from the food stand on Tashara, where I watched Kay and Nyx gobble down roasted street corn. Both moments, however, are full of love, and looking back on them and the other food vendors in Star Wars Outlaws, I appreciate how they briefly delve into an aspect of Star Wars we've really never seen before: the street food scene. This is Outlaws' strength, the moments that give you a glimpse into what it's like to live in the Star Wars universe for those who aren't fighting a galactic civil war, or training to become a space wizard. But they are so few and far between. For as much as Outlaws is a decent action game, it regularly delivers unsatisfying narrative payoffs and misses the mark when it comes to rewarding gameplay choices. In Outlaws, you play as Kay Vess, an up-and-coming mercenary who finds herself becoming an outlaw after a job goes poorly and a high-stakes bounty, called a death mark, is placed on her. To escape the bounty, Kay finds herself thrust into the position of putting together a crew to break into the near-impenetrable vault of the man who wants her dead. Her attempts to put together the perfect team take her across the outer rim of the galaxy, always accompanied by the latest in Star Wars' long procession of weird little guys, the adorably axolotl-like Nyx. In her adventures, Kay regularly comes into contact or conflict with 4 criminal organizations: the Pike Syndicate, Crimson Dawn, the Hutt Cartel, and the Ashiga Clan, as well as the Rebel Alliance and Galactic Empire. Even ignoring the obvious shortcoming, Kay is yet another human protagonist in a sea of Star Wars games, movies, and TV shows that also feature a human protagonist. Kay is just not that interesting. A common narrative through-line for Outlaws is that Kay is aimless and doesn't know what she wants for her future, not even having any plans for how to spend the millions she'll have once her crew has stolen from the man who wants her dead. The other characters like to remind Kay about this a lot, which in turn acts as a frequent prompt to the player that you're embodying someone with no apparent aspirations or goals. That's a character who's hard to relate to, and even harder to write for, as is evident by the lack of any clear arc to Kay's story. There are moments where the game seems to posit that the story has changed Kay, but there's no build-up to any of them, and so they ultimately feel narratively confusing or sudden and unfulfilling. When the credits rolled, I wasn't convinced that Kay had actually undergone any sort of personal growth. The Kay at the end of the game largely talks and acts like the one at the beginning, save for an appreciation of her new teammates, and I'm still unclear as to why she likes them. And if the main character hasn't grown at all, then what were the past 30 hours of story for? The best part about Outlaw's story, and the game in general, is the sound design. Everyone who had a part in the creation of the musical score or the design of the sound effects used for the blasters, speeders, ships, or environmental murmurs deserves all the accolades.
Get ready, Nyx.
Outlaws sounds quintessentially Star Wars, beating out the gold standard of Respawn's Jedi games. The orchestral surge as Kay takes off into space and activates her ship's hyperdrive for the first time is sublime. Perfectly jumping off a ramp in a speeder to circumnavigate an Imperial roadblock rewarded me with an intense burst of speed that I swear I could feel in my bones. For as many issues as I have with the game, there are twice as many moments where the music and sound effects briefly transported me into the world of Star Wars, and I haven't been that immersed in the franchise in decades. The music and sound design is superb. That said, Outlaws positions itself as a lot of things and doesn't follow through on most of them. The story implies this will be a heist, grab the crew, make a plan, do the job, but there's very little of that. The gameplay points to Outlaws being a stealth game, as Kay has no force powers or fancy body armor, and relies on Nyx to distract guards or security cameras, but she is so skilled with a blaster that unless you put the game on harder difficulties, she can quite handily mow through legions of stormtroopers or criminal armies and forego stealth entirely. The inclusion of a ship seems to indicate that space battles will be a pillar of the experience, but the ship handles poorly, and space battles are an unexciting slog. Barring a couple of mandatory moments, the game allows you to avoid space altogether, and that's for the better. And a relationship tracker that provides updates on Kay's fluctuating status with the 4 criminal syndicates indicates that who you have alliances with and animosity against impacts how Kay is perceived, but barring one unrewarding moment right at the end of the story, it doesn't. Combat, at least, is more exciting, and when combat breaks out, Kay is a capable gunslinger. Armed with a blaster that can deftly switch between 4 distinct shots on the fly, Kay can react to pretty much any situation in front of her. Nyx can be commanded to fetch fallen firearms in the midst of a fight, letting Kay temporarily wield more powerful rifles, snipers, and grenade launchers too. And when Kay has done enough cool stuff in a row, she can build up enough adrenaline to unleash a special move, during which time briefly slows and she can mark off several targets to take out in a split second. Kay handles just fine, no less agile than the frontrunners in other action-adventure games like Tomb Raider's Lara Croft or Horizon Zero Dawn's Aloy, but Kay can handle most threats by staying in place and keeping behind cover. Unless you put Outlaws on a harder difficulty, firefights are only a passing challenge. They take more brain power than stealth encounters because you have to react more quickly, but the enemy AI isn't very smart. Often, I could just wait behind cover and let the enemies blindly charge me, making them easy targets. These fights are cheap, easy thrills. There's nothing groundbreaking about Outlaws' combat mechanics, but they aren't bad by any means either. The main crux of Outlaws' gameplay, however, are stealth encounters. Kay regularly has to sneak inside somewhere to find someone or something, or escape an enemy base without being seen. The gameplay is fine. Kay can direct Nyx to distract guards or cameras, or use takedowns or the stun setting on her blaster to silently knock out enemies. There's even grass for her to hide in and whistle from to attract the hapless guards akin to Assassin's Creed, and air ducts to crawl through. It all works as intended, but there's not much that feels rewarding in it. The enemy AI is egregiously dumb. Lots of enemies in these missions stand still facing the computer, making them easy to sneak up on, or patrol in mapped patterns, making them easy to predict. Outlaws does not have a traditional skill tree where Kay unlocks new abilities by earning points. Instead, Kay can hear rumors about experts hidden in the world and then, using those clues, track these people down to wherever they're hiding on one of the various planets. After befriending these experts, they'll clue Kay into challenges she can complete for them, and upon doing so, Kay unlocks additional abilities and upgrades that add more options to her tool belt. These challenges add a degree of optional complexity to Outlaws gameplay, introducing small goals that you can keep in the back of your mind while in the midst of a firefight or slinking through a restricted area. Save for the handful the story forces you to unlock, none of these additional abilities are mandatory for beating the game, but completing the challenges to unlock them introduces entertaining tests of skill. These tasks aren't narratively rewarding, but their inclusion does improve the gameplay by encouraging you to mix things up a little throughout the 30-hour runtime. Going off the beaten path to complete these challenges also helps you see more of Outlaws' handful of worlds. Save for Kijimi, which is mostly just one hub, each of the planets is a collection of hub spaces connected by an open world. To get around these open worlds, Kay has 2 main means of transportation, a speeder and her ship, the Trailblazer. I'm a much bigger fan of the former. Though initially unwieldy and difficult to control, Kay's speeder can be upgraded with all manner of parts that make it more nimble and increase its maneuverability, helping Kay speed through Outlaws' handful of open worlds at entertainingly breakneck speeds. It's designed to make the trek between point A and point B faster and more thrilling, and in both goals, it succeeds. I'm colder on the Trailblazer. Aesthetically, it's a remarkable ship, one of my new favorites for the Star Wars universe, and using it to take off from and land on planets is exciting given the accompanying orchestral swell. But in the vacuum of space, the Trailblazer doesn't handle all that well, even after you upgrade it. Dogfights are either frustrating encounters against more nimble starfighters, or boring slogs against equally slow cargo ships. Thankfully, like I said before, you can skip most of space. Save for 2 or 3 mandatory space battles and missions in the main story, you never have to spend any time among the stars. There are so many little moments in Outlaws that I love. However, the unexciting space combat and unrewarding Syndicate relationship tracker don't add anything meaningful to the experience. And neither does Kay, who feels like a protagonist without a meaty narrative arc. The game has some successes when it comes to gunslinging or sneaking, both of which are aided by a superb soundtrack and incredible sound design. But Outlaws does too much of what it does poorly, and too little of what it does well.